Joining the panel presentation, watch out. Eledumare is here.
Recording in progress. Based on my experience, I realized that I have to work harder to prove myself more, so people can see me, so people can see what I have done. And then because of that, sometimes I feel isolated because I couldn't find myself here. It's hard, like it's really hard. So I need to admit that sometimes I wish that I'm not going into this academic life. But however, if I quit, then who will have this conversation about women of color? So this is really interesting. Thank you.
Wonderful. We see Bisola Mariam is here. Please share a little bit about yourself and how your identity and understanding of yourself as a woman of color played a role in shaping your experiences in the course.
Hi everyone, my name is Bisola Mariam, as you all know, and I'm really excited to be here. First of all, let me acknowledge Dr. Mera for really pouring into us, because that course is changing my life. That course did not change my life. The course is constantly and continuously changing my life. I am stressing that because, one, after that course, I wrote a position paper because I worked closely with the University of Alabama's law school, specifically the Domestic Violence Law Clinic. And the course was was the tool that kind of exposed me and opened my eyes to seeing what the systemic way, the systemic marginalization of African students, especially non-native victims of domestic violence, studying in the University of Alabama. So what I realized in the course of as a student in the course, which then is something that I'm now working on, is the fact that the available legal assistance framework does not include non-native victims of domestic violence in a way that provides them with the necessary legal assistance. So there is so much talk about justice, but do we actually closely examine the available frameworks in order to ensure that we do not just have a one-size-fits-all approach, but something that works for each and every individual? And another thing that this course kind of exposed me to is the fact that while we might talk about the domestic violence law clinic, how about the counseling services available? So the counseling centers, not just within the university, but of course within the United States, do we have representation for people who look like themselves? I mean, I walk into a counseling center, do I get to be able to interact with someone that sounds and thinks and talks like me, or someone that understands my story? In a proposal presentation that I just finished, I talked about how African student victims of domestic violence describe their experiences to their American counselors. And these are things that I was able to see because I was enrolled in this course. And so I did not just stop there. I was in Selma, Alabama for 3 days, last week, because of the things that I learned in this course. Because I told myself, it's not just important to write those papers, to churn out papers and do amazing research. How do I get involved? How do I get into those communities? And I was so excited because there was a professor who gave a remarkable presentation. Now, she was making a presentation in a community, not just in the academia. And so these are the things that Dr. Mera constantly stressed in the course. And I must say, I wasn't a superb student at the beginning of that course, but I must say that I am so proud of what I've taken out of the course and who I am and what I'm doing right now. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Like I mentioned, I am so privileged and honored to have been interacting with each one of your journeys and having a chance to interact with you. So I'm really excited that we are getting a chance to share these experiences in the public forum. So my follow-up question, and we'll make it as natural within our virtual reality here, and feel free for our panelists to jump in as you want to respond to the questions. So now, having the class moved on, the class was last semester, so how are you now developing your voice as women of color and intersecting educational, professional, and or personal dimensions of your life experience via and beyond the course now? So a way to recognize another way to understand the question: what social justice impacts are you generating at different levels while representing your voices as women of color?
So, I'll start. I think self-reflection and self-reflexivity is important when it comes to social justice work. I am currently taking a course called Social Justice and Qualitative Research. It's in the College of Education. And this course, really helps with that. Helps with self-reflection. As a Black woman, as an educated Black woman, we have privileges as well. So it's like we have to step back in a way to reflect on and figure out how we can be a voice to all women. And with this thing of intersectionality, we have to realize that it's okay being having unique identities, but still realizing that we're all one. So basically, so I just had to mention that beforehand, but basically, I know a lot of my social justice work comes with my uh, tied into my sorority. We do a lot of community service work in Birmingham and at the regional and national level. So a lot comes with that. But also in my job, I work full time and as a recruiter for a predominantly white institution. Sometimes it might be hard for other people who look like me or other people of color to feel comfortable and come into such a large university that all they see is, people who don't look like them. So I try to figure out ways how to incorporate, incorporate how to, empathize with them. Because I was like that. I went to a predominantly white institution for undergrad as well. So I think finding your niche is great. Finding someone to advocate for you is great. I'm venturing off a little bit, but so yeah, I think my voice is still developing. I'm just being uncomfortable, also challenging these systems, and I know my social justice and qual research class is helping that as well. So it's still a working process, but it also has allowed me to be more confident, more comfortable with discussing these things and bringing them up at the table. And I think, like Claudia mentioned earlier, who's going to do it for us if we're not here? So I think that's very important to note as well.
I can go. Can I?
It's honor your stage, so you don't need to ask for permission.
Okay, so professionally speaking, I must say that I think I now understand where I stand as a researcher and the kind of research work that I want to keep churning out. So I must say that one way in which this process has impacted me is I know what I should be doing research-wise. And I know the kind of scholar that I am or that I want to be or that I want the world to remember me as. So that's one way, that's one thing that I must say that, I've been able to come to understand or come to terms with. Community now I see that as a researcher, it is possible that my research is a bridge between the academic and the and the community, right? So by that, what I'm saying in essence is I am no longer just writing papers and putting them out or for in prestigious journals. I take certain aspects of my research work or my research project and break them into stories, right? That common people or everyday people can connect with. And I'm doing that in my blog post, in my, my, to those on my email list. For instance, yesterday was International Women's Day, and I must say that I literally set my community on fire. I say that because I used an academic paper, right? Not even an autoethnography paper, like, a paper that we can say feeds into the traditional research, way of writing, or the traditional way of writing as a scholar. Now, interestingly, people who are in my, social media community read this paper and were fired up. And the ripple effect of that is people came to my DM and said, no, I have gone through this, I'm going through this, I acknowledge what you're saying, I see uses, I mean, I understand this. Now, it was an academic paper, right? But because I am making the information also available and accessible to those, everyday people, they are able to connect to these stories, to these experiences, even though they are data-driven research. Lastly, this whole process is helping me to restructure a lot of things, even as a non-profit leader. I'm beginning to think of ways to build bridge between what we are doing back home in Africa and the ways in which, we can build many of the issues that I am passionate about are across cultural problems. And so this process has also led me to rethink, one, the way I go about my advocacy and the way we run our non-profit organization, in a way that we can now begin to look at ways we can collaborate with people here in the United States and make impact happen back home. And most importantly, the knowledge that I have gathered on information or on accessibility is something that has also, caused me to rethink the ways I, one, put out my stories out there, the way I write, even as a researcher, the way I put out content even to the everyday people, making sure that it is accessible to those who can those who need one form of accommodation or the other. And so I think it's an everyday journey, and I see myself living, thinking, and breathing inclusion, in everything that I now do.
I think what was it's the way that my voice is developing really is in communicate is in community with my classmates. And so one of the as I already mentioned before, I always center myself as a black woman. I always center black epistemologies. But I've realized the ways that my language has been limiting. And so what I understand is as For me, I remember the first day of class when I say I feel uncomfortable and then insecure because everyone's like really, really great that they're what they're doing. And then I remember Dr. Mehra told me that being an international student, being um, in here, it's already part of what social justice is. Like that's how I did my voice because when people see me, when people hear me, I bring something else that people like Cheryl mentioned, not like people around her don't know. And like having this conversation is also one thing that I think is important for me to develop my voice because when I talk, I'm not only talking about things that happens to me, but also people, another like other women of color besides me. And then currently I'm working on my project related to Asian American women representation in media and academic. So through this project, I want people to overcome racial and gender stereotypes in media and also in academic because we've heard a lot about women of color in media and in academic.
Rima, you want to add something?
Yes, I think for me, through the class, I learned to have confidence in my voice. I learned to identify the gap that was needed in literacy reading in the marginalized community. I learned to make allow my voice to create the connections with the stakeholders in the community. Through that, I began to establish just the perspective of being a woman of color in librarianship making a difference. So that's my.
Thanks. I want to bring up the question of as the theme of the panel. So far and moving forward, what are the challenges that you see in 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 developing yourselves as scholars slash activists slash advocates slash educators? However the label you want to apply to that. What are the challenges and how do we work together in order to overcome some of those challenges that have happened, that currently happen, and moving forward?
So I just want to brag on Reba right quick. So Reba is like a celebrity in the city of Birmingham. I see her on the news every other day. She is an example of doing the work in social justice. She's working at a library in I think Tennessee. I'm not sure, but yeah, I know it's a library. And I mean, she's on the news daily, implementing different workshops, everything that, trying to help literacy in our youth. So I just wanted to brag on her and yes.
That's a that yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Corinne, because I think that's so important. Because I also see all the good work people's doing in the community, but also like the ways that Dr. Vera is also in the street with us doing the work. I'm a part of many communities, right? But also do the rigorous work, which Dr. Mira and I we've talked about before about what that looks like as women of color in the academy when people don't want to take you seriously, right? To stay true to your voice. So one of the things that I understand as a black woman talking about black stuff, right? Not to be taken seriously. Oh, here we go, another black woman talking about black stuff, right? What does it mean to produce scholarship when you know that's gonna be the thing? Oh, or it's like this fad. Oh, it's fun to talk about black issues. It's trendy right now, right? But what does it mean for me to really be committed to producing scholarship? Because you know what? I'm interested in canon development, where it's not just white men who are producing scholarship that we're going to reflect on later that's going to inform us. My work is to make sure that I add my voice in the conversation, kind of like what Claudia was mentioning, right? And I think maybe Basola Miriam too, right? Do writing, if they don't do the writing, we don't get to read it and we don't get to engage. And so moving back when we're talking about being scholar advocates, part of the work too that my classmates and Dr. Mira does is producing work. That's advocating for me. I have to hear your voice. I have to see what it looks like for someone to be producing on a high level. But not only that for my classmates, but for my professor who gives me the opportunity. Number one, that tells me that my voice is important, that it's necessary, but also challenges me, right? Who also says, wait a minute, this ain't it. This ain't it, girl. I'm not gonna play this, we're not gonna do this. Because we're producing something that's meaningful, right? So to take my voice seriously also means those around me take it seriously, right? But also, what does it mean to take me seriously? It doesn't mean to let me off and pat me on the back when I don't deserve it. It means to hold my hand to the fire and say, okay, is this what you're, Dr. Mayer told me one time, Shalon, is this really what you want to do? He's like, you gotta ask yourself that question. There's certain commitments that come with the work. And so, you know, as I talk about social justice for me, what does it look like for me as a student in this moment, right? Is it, what does that look like on the level for my professor and my colleagues? It's doing the work, it's encouraging, but also holding me to the fire, engaging my work like it seriously, letting me know that, hey, you know what, I saw that you did this good job, right? But not only this, let's talk about giving our budding scholars opportunities. How many emails have we got from Dr. Mira saying, hey, he understands to be a scholar to be published, right? Let's get you. Because guess what? We're gonna be in the I mean, we're gonna be out, you know, in the workforce, right? Wanting to be taken seriously, not only within our communities outside of the academy, but within. So let's talk about what that means, right? To be socially just in the classroom means to give your students to take seriously their voices and then provide opportunities and don't make it just lip service. Oh, I got you, you're fun, but never advocate for me, right? Or make sure that to introduce me to or introduce us to opportunities to develop ourselves. And it's scary sometimes, right, as we are developing our voices to put ourselves out there. That's a fear of mine. I know that my thoughts change as I develop in conversation with you all. There's things that I've changed. I have a fear of moving forward, right? Because it's like, oh my goodness, I don't want to put my work out in the world. But you have to do it. Being a scholar is, you know what? Being honest about, okay, I may have got that wrong. But you've done rigorous work before. Dr. Mir is showing us those methods. It doesn't divorce our voices from the scholarship. We can't do that. And this is what is so important to me. So I wanted to make sure, as I talk about social justice, it happens in the classroom, a socially just classroom. And we've experienced that not only with Dr. Mir, but amongst one another.
And
Okay.
I think it's important to, sorry, Basola, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I'm just 1 minute. But I think it's important to hone in on this thing that Shalon said, commitment. I mean, you know, I have gotten to the point where, well, not gotten to the point, but I have experienced where I'm the only black person in the class, in a social just class, social justice class. That saddens me, that like Shalonda mentioned, oh, she's talking about, you know, blackness again. She's talking about this, you know, and it's sometimes it gets discouraging when, you know, it gets hard when you're the only person in that classroom. And no matter how much research has been done on like black women, the black experience, you can't tell me more about my, you know, a black experience better than me. You know what I mean? And I'm sure Claudia and Basola Miriam feel this way as well. Like you can't tell me more about myself. You know, I don't. You just can't. So it's just sometimes, you know, it gets hard. You just it gets discouraging because you're the only one there. Um, but I think that's also in developing a voice. You know, you got to get a little bit uncomfortable with going to the top. Is all you're going to get uncomfortable. You can't stay content. But so yeah, I just wanted to, you know, and having a support system. We all read about Dr. Mara. He's awesome, but having that support system who's willing to walk, like Shalana said, walk through that fire with you. I know my professor now. She talks about that. She wants to publish our papers at the end of the semester, and she was like, "We gonna do it, and if they want us to do something, you know, revise it, we gonna figure it out. But we gonna also say our voice. We're gonna also keep that voice. We're not gonna change this. We're not gonna change that. This journal don't want it. Let's go to another journal. So it's also like having that community, that support system that will walk with you through that too. So.
Yeah. In response to the question, I would like to share a couple of things that I noted here quickly. The first is what I call paper to community. So there's a difference between what you actually are able to gather in true research and what sometimes you're actually able to, do in a community. And so I think that is problematic because sometimes you do all of the amazing work, you gather the data, you build results, you have the facts, but to actually get what you have done in terms of research to actually translate to meaningful impacts from paper to community can be really challenging, especially when the only voice you have is the pen. You have no position of power. You can influence policy literally. You can only do research that informs, right? You cannot change the policy itself or those policies. And so that I think is seriously problematic. I make this very important point because of the challenges I faced, while I was working on my project, and such amazing, work that I'd done, but it didn't go. I mean, I couldn't go so far because I am not the American Bar Association. I cannot literally tell the Domestic Violence Law Clinic to, do an overhauling of the existing legal assistance framework for non-native victims just because I have done research that shows or exposes them to the problematic nature of the justice system available to non-native victims, right? So that was a beautiful research. Wow, amazing, wow, moving. But when it comes to actually getting the work done or having policies put in place, it's there is this. It looks like like an Herculean task for a journey of 1,000 miles, and so I think that is really problematic and challenging. And another thing is the need to remain now the challenge of maintaining one or two or three or more identities. I say that because one, as a scholar, you have to constantly publish or you perish, right? And when it comes to making meaningful impact, it's not like it's not something that you can do from just carrying out a study and then publishing within 6 months. Real change actually takes time. So if, for instance, you want to remain an activist researcher, you're definitely going to be encountering a lot of difficulties. Think about when you're trying to tell the stories of people. what if they suddenly say, okay, you know what, I'm not interested. I don't want my story to be told, right? I don't even want to do this. I don't want to be a part of this project. So those challenges have a way of making it difficult, or, making it difficult for you to quickly or speedily progress, even as a scholar advocate, especially when you're carrying out data-driven work that would require full involvement of people whose stories they themselves must tell, right? So that is one big challenge that I think we constantly have to battle with. And I think the last thing I have here is the challenge in being taken seriously. So being taken seriously in the academic, as a researcher, and the challenge in being taken seriously in these communities that you're walking into. So first, as a researcher, there's a challenge that comes with you doing something that not many people are working or doing, right? In in autoethnography, for instance, as a research method, it has its limitation. And so is the kind of research that we as activist researchers do, right? It's different. It's not the same as what a lot of people are used to. And so you're bringing a different belief system that is problematic, that is not the serious way of doing things. And so you have the challenge in being taken seriously within the academic, and the challenge in being taken seriously in these communities, especially sometimes when your stories does not exactly fit into their own narratives. So they look at you and say, okay, what are you going to be talking to us about? Have you walked in my shoes? Yes, your story sounds like mine, but it's not exactly my story. So there is this, this messiness in you maintaining your identity as a scholar and your identity as someone who actually wants to carry out meaningful change. And I will end by saying that the challenge in being taken seriously again could be that you want to constantly appear smart. But when it comes to these issues, you cannot tell me that someone who is, for instance, experiencing emotional abuse, that experience is not as important as someone who is experiencing physical violence, right? And so these are two different kind of experiences or lived experiences, but not one does not reduce the importance of the seriousness of the other. And so even as a researcher carrying out work, working with victims or trying to, tell people's stories, it might not even fit into the existing narratives out there. And so that itself makes it difficult for you to be taken seriously, right? And so it's so messy, it's so annoying, it gets me really angry, but we must continue to talk about this. We're not going to keep quiet, we're not going to stop, because that someone is listening alone is something, and that's progress, right? That we're able to put our voice out there is some level of progress. And the more we talk about it, the more we keep lending our voice and putting ourselves out there, things will change. And I believe that, we're doing the work already, and it can only get better. Thank you.
To answer this question, I do believe that problems related to women of color, especially in academia, always happen. It is something that we all experience. Like it's always there, and it will take lots of time, lots of patience, lots of effort to change it, to solve it, to overcome it. So I was thinking, being a woman is already hard, and then people of color is already hard. So like being a woman, like of color, is like harder than that, like harder than being only those two groups. And so as Isola Mariam stated before, like not being treated fairly as a peer, I would say that's one thing that I think I will experience as a challenge in the future, because coming from countries that not English is not my first language, there's always people who look down at me because of my English. And another thing that related to my current project, as Shalanda and Karan mentioned before, I wish people see see my project as Claudia and her project, not Claudia, not Asian women study about Asian again. Because it's me and my project. It's not because my race that define my women of me being woman of color who wants to study about this. Like it's not like this is me and my project. That's it. That's it. Nothing else. Thank you.
I think Claudia brings up a really good point, and Basola Mariam kind of hit on it too. We've been talking about it, this idea of like diminishing experience in scholarship, right? So that's the problem. We think in the academy that experience isn't that's not doing rigorous work, right? Experience is kind of okay, that's cute. She's talking about her experience. And so when we talk about being taken seriously, right, when we're discussing our experiences within the academy, that's part of the problem. So when I want to bring it back to talking about voice, I think of a story when I was in seminary and we had to do contextual education, which meant that we had to go in community and work. So I was embedded in a church community, and I was tasked with putting together something. And I was so excited because I was learning all these new terms, and and so I was just, it was gonna be great. I was in the church and doing the work in seminary and bringing it to the people. And later on, my pastor pulled me aside and she said, "Oh, Sean, okay, who also had her PhD? Well, I didn't have my PhD at this time, but she's an educated woman." She said, "Okay, Sean, let's talk about it. Everything that you said is good, but you're not speaking their language." She was like, "You're not speaking their language. You're not in the classroom. So everything you're saying makes sense, but but the way you're saying it doesn't translate to them." So but I wasn't taught. I wasn't taught not to speak the language of the academy. I wasn't taught that. I wasn't taught that. I was excited about it because it made real practical sense to me and for the women that I was having a conversation with. However, the academy has a really good job, right, of giving you all this jargon and separating you from your community. And so when we're talking about developing voice, something that's been really important as I've been doing that work is being able to take seriously what I'm doing, being engaged with other scholars who may not be talking about my particular experience, but I can, here's the word, extrapolate from their work things that are meaningful for the work that I do, so I can go out in the community, right, and speak it the way that I speak, right? And I want to do that within the academy and outside. Why do they have to be two different voices? So Basola Mariam talks about this, which I really love, paper to community. I think for me, I'm having this conversation about my head and my heart, right? This kind of idea that there's a separation, right? This idea that the head and the heart work outside of each other, right? One has to be here, there's always this. So what we're doing as we're developing our voices is doing this. They're equalizing. My head and my heart, the work that I do, right, isn't just about something like Claudia was trying to give voice to. Wasn't about just doing work about Asian women because she's an Asian woman. No, we're doing work that makes sense to how we produce knowledge, right? Because when I'm in the class and introduced to scholars' work that's working through a research question in a real interesting way, right? I know that that's influenced by something that changes the way now that I engage with research. So for me as a womanist scholarship, I have a womanist scholar, I have commitments. I have 4 commitments.
sorry to cut short. I know we kind of ran out of time, but it's most inspiring, and I think it's our role to make all of us uncomfortable in the process of spotlighting our experiences and challenging the hegemonic understanding of what is knowledge and what is research. So I'm really looking forward to tracking each one of your journey as you continue to make an impact and make a difference. So thanks so much for this conversation, and of course we can move to the next panel and we will continue hearing from our colleagues. Thank you so much for our audience. Sorry we didn't get a chance to talk, have questions. Just please reach out to any of us, and we will be really great to have continue the conversation. Take care, all of you. I will see you in a few minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Mehra.
Thanks so much.
Take care, guys. Bye. And so, guys, we just finished the virtual conference, and I must say that before now, I was worried, will I do well? What will I say? How will it come? But you see, the universe would make a way. And I just want to encourage you as a researcher, as a scholar of color, a woman of color, a man of color, as an African scholar, keep doing what you're doing. It can only get better. Even if you're not an African scholar, whatever your race or ethnicity is, your voice matters, and someone wants to hear you. Take care. God bless you. And my name is Bisola Miriam. If you want to learn more about my research, please visit bisolamiriam.com/research. Take care. Bye.